right. Well, welcome, everybody. Yep, nope, that's all right. Nope, I get it. I feel it. I understand. I know you survived the storm. Everybody doing okay? Hopefully everybody's all right. It's, it was a wild one yesterday, right? Beautiful day, absolutely gorgeous, and then it turned into the Wizard of Oz. I don't know. It was wild. I mean, do you guys get the hail and stuff like that? I mean, I had like gumball size hail at our house. It was a little crazy, a little bit crazy, but grateful to be here, glad to be here, and yeah, I just want to welcome you. Congratulations, you figured out where we are today. We have moved around a lot. I think maybe 14 times. I think 14 times is what we counted that Life Tree has moved in and through the years. So we just keep moving around. We just want to keep you on your toes. We don't want you to get too comfortable. And so, but grateful to be back here, grateful to be in this place. We were in this space for about 3 years prior to COVID, and then it, goofed us all up, and we moved around for a couple of years. Tried out Saturday night, see if we liked that for a little while, and it worked. So, but we're back here, so I notice, I just have to point out that some of you, it's your first time here. That's great, welcome. For those who've been here before, you went right back to where you were. It's been 3 years, and you have your name on those spaces. And so I'm just saying, it's just, I notice it, and it's good. It's good to be back. Before we get into the message, I want to invite you just to take out your program, which you should have received when you came in today. And if you didn't get a program, just raise your hand, and our ushers will make sure that you get one. But in the program is a connection card. I invite you to take that out right now and just fill that out. We want to thank you for being here and follow up with you. If you have a prayer request, you can put it on there. If you've got anything that you need, let us know. And we'll collect those at the end of the service, but just want to invite you to take a minute and do that. As you're filling that out, also let you know if you want to turn in your Bibles to Luke 19. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're looking at a passage from Luke 19. I think it's page 802. If you have the Bibles in the seats there, you can use one of those. But I just want to start out by saying God is faithful. No matter where we've been, no matter where we've traveled through the years, we've always had a place to be, and I'm grateful for that. And God is He's faithful, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when we're like, why are we here and there and up and down? Why do we have to move all these places? Listen, God has always been faithful, and even when it feels like nonsense. So today we're wrapping up our sermon series called Holy Nonsense. If you've been listening at all, we've been talking about this. And the premise of Holy Nonsense, the premise of this series is that there are times in our lives where God prompts us to do things that sound and feel like nonsense. And if you've ever experienced that, but you felt like God telling you to do something and you're like, and it feels like nonsense because it is. Sometimes the thing God asks us to do is like, that's not normal. A rational person wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense. But there's something qualitatively different about the nonsense that God asks us to do, and it's that it's holy, which means that there's a purpose in it. There's a divine purpose in it, that God's got a plan for it, that it's going to be effective, that whatever He has you doing, it's going to accomplish something. And so that means we probably need to do it. So we looked at the life of Moses, right? People of Israel, they need water. And God says, hit a rock with a stick. It's nonsense, right? But we learned there that God solves problems we can't, and He just wants us to trust Him. And then we looked at the life of Ananias, who had this, if there was anybody Ananias wanted to avoid, it was this guy named Saul who wanted to kill Christians. And God says, hey, Ananias, I want you to go to him. And Ananias is like, I don't want to go to him. That's a bad man. And God says, go to him, because what we learned there is that sometimes God will prompt us to go to people we'd rather avoid, but it turns out that you're actually an answer to their prayer because you don't know what God is doing in their life. And then we turned to Peter. And Peter showed us holy nonsense, that sometimes God shows up in the places that we know best, and the things where we think is like our zone, right? We understand. So Peter's a fisherman, so God showed up on the water and said, Peter, I want you to fish over here. And he says, that's not how you fish. That's not when you fish, and we're not going to get anything. And he had He caught the best catch of his life because God says, hey, it's not so much about the fish, but I want to show you who I am in ways that you wouldn't see, so he comes into the places that we know best. And then last week, Pastor Vic talked about Jericho and Joshua, that sometimes there are battles that you have to fight, and God says, hey, I got a great plan for you. You're going to go to war against this city, and you're a great warrior. That's why I want you to walk around this city quietly for 7 days. Like, I'm sorry, what? You want me to fight by just walking around quietly? And God says, yeah, and then when you're done, I just want you to yell real loud and the walls are going to fall down. It's nonsense, and it's actually what happened. That there are battles in your life that perhaps you're fighting in ways that you think you understand, because they make sense to you, but you're not winning that battle. And God says, hey, I got a plan for you. I want you to do this, and it's going to sound like nonsense, but the point is it's going to show you that God's the one who wins our battles for us. So again, holy nonsense. And so in all of this holy nonsense, the hardest part is doing the nonsense because it challenges our understanding. Because we like to think of ourselves as rational and intelligent people who have brains and things like that. That God's given us a mind, and he doesn't ask us to actually abandon our mind. And here's the interesting thing with holy nonsense. That God doesn't actually want you to check your brain at the door. He actually wants you to use your brain and understand that this is nonsense. He wants you to know it's nonsense. He doesn't want you to pretend like it's not. He wants you to know that it's nonsense because that's what makes it holy. The fact that you knowingly do it anyway. That you know this is ridiculous. You go, but I'm willing to do it. That's where our faith gets put in action. So another challenge is that we know this. We know this. We know that there's holy nonsense, and we know what we're doing, and we know that God's prompting us to do this, but nobody else knows that. And there are times where we're doing something, and it feels like everybody's looking at us sideways. Like, what are you doing? And we're like, yeah, but you don't know God said it. And they're like, I don't understand what you're doing. It's ridiculous. See, to many people, when they look at the church and they look at people of faith, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense how people of faith operate to the rest of the world because it looks like nonsense, and it's hard to blame them because it is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. And here's the thing. God doesn't deny that. God doesn't say, it should make sense. He goes, no, actually, we read this a few weeks ago, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. He says this, God chose the things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. See, all of faith is nonsense. It's intentional. It's intentional. God made it that way on purpose to ensure that everyone has access to him, not just the powerful, right? That the powerful don't like it because it threatens their control. God says, I do it this way because I want to make sure that those people who are prideful and powerful, that they don't feel that way because it's not about that. So what happens is the powerful don't like it, and they make up lies about God, and they try and manipulate, and they try and change things to ensure that they stay in power. Because they just want, it's only for the best and the strongest and the most influential. And the unfortunate reality is that lies that they make up about God, those things that they say, are still being perpetuated by people who seek to maintain power. They don't want to maintain powder. That would be weird. That would be weird. Tell me. It's early for me too. I'm trying. But here's the thing. There's a lot of nonsense out there about God that is perpetuated by people who want to maintain power. And that's not holy nonsense. It's just nonsense. It's just lies and untruths and inaccurate, intentional misinformation, right? I don't want to say fake news because it's political, and I'm not trying to be political, but there's a lot of misinformation about God that's perpetuated in the world by people who want to maintain power, by people who want to and it's nonsense. And it's actually a strategy of the enemy. He says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the truth about God, I'm going to twist it, I'm going to manipulate it, and I'm going to distort it and corrupt it, and all of a sudden people will think about Jesus in ways that aren't accurate, and they'll assume things about God that aren't accurate. And there's a whole lot of nonsense in the world. And this is something that Jesus actually had to deal with when he was walking on the earth. That there were people who were making assumptions about him, and they were believing things about him that weren't accurate. And eventually it got so bad. It got so bad for Jesus that the only solution was that he was going to do something. He had to do something that was one of the most powerful acts of holy nonsense in human history. And we're going to read it in Luke chapter 19 again. So just for some context here, as we read the story, we're going to come into the story in a minute. But as we read it, for 30 years, if you know Jesus' story, he lived off the radar. He was just a guy from Nazareth, a carpenter's son who was also a carpenter, inherited the family business, and he's just going about his business. For 30 years, nobody knows that name. And then it becomes time for him to step into this role as the Son of God, to reveal himself to the world, and he does it gradually. He didn't hold like a big party. He didn't hold like a political, I'm going to announce my candidacy. It wasn't anything like that. He said, I'm going to do it one at a time. And so he's very quiet. He would just begin to teach small things, no crowds, no marketing plan. He didn't have a strategy, didn't have a brand. It wasn't anything like that. No Facebook. He would tell people that he healed, right? He'd say, hey, listen, don't say anything. Don't go tell anybody. Keep it quiet. He only took on 12 students, or disciples, we call them, and he spent about 3 years doing this, just moving and teaching and gradually, slowly building a foundation. But it wasn't this big public thing. He kept it on the down low, right? Inevitably, word gets out, because when you heal somebody from the dead, like that's pretty dramatic. When people are they're sick and they get well, people they hear about it. When they're blind and they can see, they talk about it, right? When you see people that used to be out of their mind and possessed, and now they're in their right mind and they're contributing, like that word starts to get around. And rumors of the possibility that there's something special about this man who teaches, this teacher, this rabbi, right? There's something about this guy, and that there's even whisperings that maybe he could be the Messiah. This long-awaited Messiah for the Jewish people began to spread. But nobody knows anything for certain. There's only this increased sense of curiosity. He's staying in the shadows. He refused the limelight. And eventually it was more than just a choice to kind of keep it quiet. He became a wanted man. See, over time, what happened is he began to kind of violate some of the religious laws of the time. And I say religious laws, but they were actually religious laws, and he violated them. The law of the Sabbath and some of these other things. And so what happened is the Jewish leaders had warrants out for his arrest. They considered him a heretic. He was a threat to their power, right? They don't like this guy. They don't like the things he's teaching. He's teaching people to break the laws, and the laws are what kept the religious elite in power, right? So people in power don't like when you disrupt or threaten their power. And so they began to make up things about Jesus and call him things and say he's not good, right? And they began to say, hey, we want to arrest this guy. We want to throw him in jail. We want to eliminate him. And so basically, Jesus now is exposing the nonsense that people are believing about God. And the religious leaders, they're not happy about it. And that's where we're going to pick up the story, okay? That's where we're going to pick up the story. And I want you to, as we read, I just want to ask you, look for holy nonsense. Look for something in here that you're like, that doesn't make sense. That's, all right, that's clearly the holy nonsense in this, all right? So here we go. We're going to pick it up in verse 29. It'll be on behind me here, so you can read along. If you have your Bible on your app or actually hard copy, you can read along. Here we go. As Jesus came to the towns of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. Go into that village over there, he told them, and as you enter it, you'll see a young donkey tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. Let's pause. Interesting. There's a donkey there, and he says, okay, you're going to see a donkey, and you're just going to untie it, and you're just going to bring it here. Now, from where they were to Jerusalem was about 2 miles, so Jesus is like, hey, maybe he got a rental, right? He reserved a car in advance, and he says, I got a donkey there, you'll see it, nothing unusual, right? Okay, verse 31, he says, if anyone asks you, why are you untying that colt, just say, the Lord needs it. I'm going to pause. If you're one of pretend you're one of those two like that are being asked to do this. And you go, okay, I'm going to go get a donkey. And he says, oh, and by the way, if somebody asks you why you're doing that, all of a sudden I'm going to go, wait, what? Why would they ask me that? Am I stealing a donkey? Am I going to steal a donkey? Is Jesus telling me to go steal? Or is this some kind of Jedi mind trick? Is this the nonsense here? So if they say, hey, the Lord, why are you untying? I'm going to go like this. The Lord needs it. Why are you untying that donkey? The Lord needs it. I'm sorry, what? The Lord needs it. Like, is this the nonsense? Right? I don't know. Let's keep reading. Right? So verse 32, it says, so they went and they found the colt, just as Jesus had said. And sure enough, as they were untying it, right, the owners asked them, why are you untying the colt? And I can imagine the two guys are like, they freeze, right? And they're like, dang it. And they look at each other and they're like, you're going to say it? You're going to say it? Right? And they go back and it's like this slow turn, right? Why are you untying the donkey, right? And they turn. And this is what they say, right? The disciples simply replied, the Lord needs it? Right? And just waiting. Like, did it work? Does it, like their minds are racing. Like, I can't believe I'm actually saying what this is. This is nonsense, right? Except for the fact that Jesus told them to do it. But here's the thing. It works. It works. Now, I imagine the disciples look at each other like, dude, that worked. It worked. They believed it, right? They don't say another word. They're like, act natural. Act natural. Just turn around and walk away with the donkey. Just walk away with the donkey, right? That's what goes in my head when I hear this story. I don't know if about you, but when I read the story, that's the kind of stuff that, like, maybe I've got an imagination. I don't know, but that's how I'm envisioning this. And I did some research into it, and that's not at all what happened here. Not at all. Nothing like that. At that time, and in that part of the world, there was this custom called angaria. It was this situation where a dignitary could request use of property for personal reasons, right? It's like, I'm commandeering this vehicle. FBI, it's now mine, right? It's like that kind of a thing where a dignitary, somebody in power could say, hey, I need use of your whatever, your donkey in this situation for a period of time. And that right was extended to rabbis, right? So this was not unusual. So actually, when Jesus said it to the disciples, they'd have been like, oh, okay, no problem. We're going to go do that. And if anybody says, just be like, oh, yeah, the rabbi needs it. And they're going to be like, okay, no problem. So this was absolutely normal. It feels like nonsense to me because I don't live back then. I don't understand it all, right? It's just a little odd. But it would have been completely understandable. This is not nonsense. So we haven't come to it yet. Okay, verse 35. So they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. And as he rode along, the crowd spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. Right, there it is. There it is. Why is Jesus going to ride a donkey into Jerusalem? Right? That's nonsense. Kings ride horses. It's what they do. Right? A donkey would have made Jesus look ridiculous. Anybody ever ridden a horse? Okay, some of you, I know you guys got horses, right? Anybody ever ride a donkey? You got a couple, all right. Did you ride a donkey in the Grand Canyon? No. Basketball? Donkey basketball. I don't understand. All right. Ask Tim about that later, because that's a whole nonsense alert. Donkey basketball. I don't know what that's about. All right. But here's the thing. I've never ridden a donkey, and I feel like if I rode a donkey, it would be pretty silly. Like, you couldn't help but laugh. Like, the second you get on the donkey, you just start laughing. You're like, I'm on a donkey, right? This is ridiculous. But again, this isn't really nonsense back then, right? Kings rode horses certainly on their way to war, but they would commonly ride donkeys when they were in times of peace. It was a symbol. It would communicate to people, I'm not coming in battle, I'm coming in peace. But it wasn't uncommon for someone in power to ride in on a donkey. It wasn't unusual. It was actually even prophesied about that this would happen in a certain way. Zechariah said it. Zechariah chapter 9 says this, rejoice, O people of Zion. Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. And he says this, right? He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey, riding even on a donkey's colt. They got that specific. I mean, hundreds of years earlier, prophesied about that. He's going to ride a donkey. And it says this in verse 10, I will remove the battle chariots from Israel, and the war horses, because horses represented war. It's not about war, it's about peace. I will destroy all the weapons used in battle, and your king will bring peace to the nations. His realm will stretch from sea to sea and from the Euphrates River to the ends of the earth. There's no nonsense here. At least it's not on the part of the donkey. That's not the nonsense. See, this would have made total sense culturally in that setting, in that context. This is Jesus making a statement, and they get it. I'm coming in peace. I'm not coming to bring war. So then we get to verse 37. It says, when he reached the place where the road started down the Mount of Olives, all the followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. And blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. They said, Hosanna is what they were shouting here. Hosanna means blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Save us, peace in heaven and glory in highest heaven. Both Matthew, this is interesting, this account here is recorded in all the Gospels. So you got it in Matthew and in Mark, and we're reading it in Luke. But Matthew and Mark's account tells us that people would cut branches and wave them as Jesus walked by. That's what you have today. That's why you got those things. Actually, what you're supposed to be doing with those palms right now is you're supposed to be tickling the person in front of you without them knowing it. Yeah, and I'm like, I'm a little, thank you, Joy, thank you. I'm a little disappointed. At least that's what I did when I was a kid. That's what we do with them. But they tell us that those branches were cut down during this time. That's what Palm Sunday, that's what this has come to mean. And it was a little unusual that the people would have been cutting branches down at this time, because those were expected during what was called the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Shelters, or now Sukkot is what they call it today. And people would build temporary shelters out of branches and things like that, and they would live in these shelters for a week to sort of remember and remind themselves that when they came out of Egypt, they lived in temporary housing, that God provided for them, that they always had a home, that though they were wandering, they always had a home. But this was Passover week. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. So this was the wrong time for that. But waving them during Passover, which is a reminder of God's salvation, kind of makes sense, because the people were getting excited that Jesus could have been the fulfillment of their hopes and dreams, that because they were under Roman oppression, because they were, not in power, that it was like connecting back to this sense of a Messiah, of saving out of Egypt, that they'd be saved out of the Romans. So there was a connection there, that they're waving this, saying, I know it's not time for this yet, but maybe this is the time for it. Maybe this is time for God to give us some new hope, some new home. So it actually makes sense. So the people thought Jesus was saying he was the Messiah, and he was. The donkeys made sense. The request made sense. The branches made sense. So where's the nonsense? That's the story. Where's the nonsense? See, in the mid-90s, psychologists Arian Mack and Irvin Rock wrote a book based on some research that they'd been doing. And they presented this idea, this premise, this phenomenon that they termed inattentional blindness. Anybody ever heard that phrase? Got any psychologists? Inattentional blindness. Okay. All right, thank you. Good job. It's the failure to notice a fully visible but unexpected object because your attention was on something else, another task, an event, or an object. We miss obvious things if we're actually intentionally looking for something else. How many of you have ever seen there's a video about a group of people that are walking around passing a basketball? Some are wearing white shirts, some are wearing black shirts, and they're passing a basketball back and forth, and you're supposed to count how many times the people in white shirts pass the basketball. Anybody ever seen this video? No, some of you. Okay. So did it get you? It got you, Vic? Did it get you, Nick? Because it got me. Okay, because here's the deal. You're counting, and the correct answer, I'm sorry, I'm going to blow it for you now. But the correct answer is, I think it's 15. There were 15 times that the people in white shirts passed the basketball to each other. And I was pretty proud of myself because I counted correctly. What I did not notice was that in the middle of the video, a gorilla walked through the middle of the group. Never saw it. Not at all, because I was counting the people in white shirts passing the basketball, because I'm a first child, and I follow the rules. I did what you told me to do. And as I did it, I absolutely missed a very obvious gorilla dancing across the whole thing like this even doing a little one of these, and then it kept going. Never saw it. Never saw it. Inattentional blindness. Because we're looking for something, we see something else that's very obvious. So the holy nonsense was front and center. How did we miss it? We just read this whole story. Where was the holy nonsense? I don't know if you saw it, but it's easy to miss. And here's the thing. This time, the holy nonsense wasn't something God was asking of us, but rather something God himself was doing. Let me ask you, was Jesus right about what that the donkey was going to be there? Was Jesus right that the donkey was there? Yep. Was he right about what the owners were going to say? Yep. And was he right about what they said was going to give them the donkey back? Yep. Okay. So he knew all that. Is it possible that he also knew what was going to happen after he rode that donkey? He knew that he wanted that donkey, and he knew that he was going to ride that donkey into Jerusalem. Do you think the limit of Jesus' vision was just that particular thing, or did he know what was going to happen? He knew that he was going to ride into this city and that they were going to kill him. That this was going to be a one-way trip. Scholar Darrell Bach writes this: Jesus knew exactly what he was riding into. In effect, Jesus is directing the sequence of events that leads to his death. And another writer put it this way: it is a breathtaking thing to think of a man with a price upon his head, an outlaw, deliberately riding into a city in such a way that every eye was fixed upon him. It is impossible to exaggerate the sheer courage of Jesus. See, here's the thing. This was not quiet anymore. This was going to be bananas. This was going to be the show. You ride a donkey into Jerusalem where people are, all this curiosity is building and building, and there's rumors that he might be here at Passover, and could this be the Messiah? And there's all this fervor going on. The people are like frothing, and all of a sudden, you're going to ride in on a donkey, and they're going to know about Zechariah, and they're going to know about all this stuff. This is going to be a show. Jesus has always existed in the shadows, but now he's going to be very public. He says, today is the day I will make this my coming out party. This was going to be very, very public. Who knowingly puts themselves in a life-threatening position? You know what I call that? It's nonsense. That's nonsense. Jesus didn't check his brain at the gate. He knew what was happening. He knew the people cheering would eventually turn and chant for his death. He knew that pain was ahead. He knew that the followers that were with him were going to abandon him, that they would run away. He knew that one of those closest to him would betray him. He knew he had the power to return to heaven without the cross, but he chose to endure it. He knew all that stuff. It's nonsense that he would get on that donkey and ride into Jerusalem. Often, when prophets felt that they'd said everything they had to say, they have nothing left to say. I've said all my things. The only thing I have left to do is to demonstrate it, to put some sort of action. They would resort to dramatic action to communicate their point. Jesus had taught for 3 years. He had said everything that there was left to say. He had talked about God's love and his grace and his mercy. He had told all these parables. He'd said all this stuff about how God wants a relationship and not what right relationship. He had challenged all the religious leaders. He had brought down this new idea of understanding who God is and the relentless love of the Father for the children. And now it's time for him to show it. He said, I've talked about it, and I've talked about it, and I've talked about it, and now it's time for me to show you. And so he came. And he came humbly, not with a show of force. And he came to them, not making them come find him. And he came to give, not to take. And he came to forgive, not to condemn. And he came to love, not to lay down a law. Jesus wanted everyone to know that there's nothing he won't do to get our attention. That there's no price he won't pay for our good, that he will hold nothing back to show his love. He wanted us to know the Father is willing to endure our rejection, to suffer misunderstanding. So here's the point. God doesn't just ask us to do holy nonsense. He does it himself. He does it himself. Jesus chose to do holy nonsense. And here's the thing. He chose to do holy nonsense to clear up the nonsense about himself, about who God was. We needed to know what God was like, so Jesus showed us. Our God laid down his life for us. No greater love, right? There's no greater love than anyone would lay down their life for another. He says, listen, I've talked about it and I've taught it and I've given you everything. Now it's time for me to show you. I'm going to literally make this a dramatic event, and I'm going to ride this donkey right into the city. And you're all going to know that, because the disciples knew, the followers knew that Jesus was wanted. They knew how dangerous this was. And they knew that he did that on purpose. See, the holy nonsense that God prompts us to do simply prepares the way for God to do his holy nonsense. We do holy nonsense just to open up the door. Our holy nonsense is nothing compared to God's holy nonsense. Ours is just making us a little uncomfortable. His costs his life. I'm going to invite the band up, and we're going to close in just a moment. But as they come up, this past week, everybody take a deep breath. Yet another headline in the news of a senseless act of violence in our country. Taking the lives of children and adults. Another reminder that our world is full of hurting and broken, angry, and lost people. Our world doesn't need more nonsense. We need to know who Jesus really is. Because there's a lot of people getting angry at God when they hear stuff like this and blaming him, and it's not because God is to blame. It's because they've believed things about God that people have said, that people in power have said, that other people have said, that the enemy has fed them. That's absolute nonsense. See, because we don't need to run from God right now. We need to run to God. Because the answer for our world, for our hurting, for our pain, for our confusion, the only answer is found at the feet of Jesus. We need to know that Jesus is our hope and our peace, our healer, our defender, our provider, that he is good and loving and trustworthy and just and gracious. Let me tell you, that God is not somewhere far off judging us, condemning us, got his book of laws out and keeping score of every time we screw up. That's not God. But our God is in the middle of this mess with us. He comes to us humble, on a donkey, vulnerable. He says, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to know that you might reject me. You might blame me. You might accuse me. You might curse me, and yet he comes anyway. I'm going to clear up all the nonsense about me. I'm not up there just untouched by you. No, we have the power to reject God, to hurt him, to despise him, to grieve his heart. See, our God is not callous and uncaring and indifferent. He is woundable. That's what Jesus is showing us. It's nonsense that the God of the universe would choose to make himself woundable. Who does that? If you had the power to let nothing hurt you, would you choose to forfeit that? To give that up to people who won't even appreciate it? Who may take advantage of it and say, oh, this is our opportunity to strike then. But his love for us is greater than his concern for himself. Because that's who our God is. See, the holy nonsense that Jesus came to do was explicitly for the reason to clear up all the other nonsense about him. To eliminate the lies, to tear it all down and say, no, let me show you who God is. In Ecclesiastes, King Solomon writes about the times. To everything there is a season, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. There are times to speak, and there are times to do. There comes a point in which we've said all that can be said, and it's time to show it, to do it. We've sensed, again, that sense of timing, that God's got this divine timing, that 2023, not just for us, but for the world, that this is a year of awakening. That God is telling us it's time to put our faith in action. Wake up. Put your faith in action, church. Holy Nonsense isn't just a sermon series. It's the sum total of the life of faith. God has called us to live different, to be different. He's never going to stop prompting you and me to do holy nonsense. He is continually going to do it because it reveals who he really is to a world who really needs to know that. God doesn't call us to comfort, to just find a faith that fits in our nice, neat little box. He's going to stretch us and pull us and compel us to do things that make us a little uncomfortable. We go, God, that looks like nonsense. People won't understand me. They're going to judge me. And he goes, I know all that. I'm not asking you to put your mind to the door. I'm asking you to knowingly say, yes. God, I'll bang a rock with a stick. I will go to somebody I'd rather avoid. God, I will listen to you in the areas I think I know better. I will fight battles different than everybody else tells me I should. God, I will trust you for all of it. Because when we are obedient to do what God prompts us to do, it prepares the way for him to reveal himself to a world that needs to see who he really is. So we say yes. Say yes to the promptings of God. It's not only for you. It will change you. It will form you. It will draw you closer to him, but it will also open a pathway to the world that desires what only he can satisfy. God desires to reveal himself to a world that needs him, and we get to be part of that. We don't have to, but we get to. So we're going to close by sharing in communion today. Communion is a tradition where we eat and drink together. And if you have not been served, if you've not received communion, please just raise your hand again, and our ushers will make sure that you get some. So if you make sure everybody's good. All right. It's a tradition that we share where we eat and drink together to make sure that we don't forget all the holy nonsense God has done for us. Like communion, Palm Sunday is one of those interesting mix of emotions. We're celebrating his death. We're celebrating his pain. It's a celebration of Jesus revealed to the world, but we also know it led to his death. We know there's resurrection after it, but it's this mix. It's a sacredness about it. There's this sobering reality. We're grateful, deeply moved by it, thankful for it, want to celebrate it, but at the same time honor the seriousness that it cost him his life. It's both a day of joy and sorrow, a day of grief and a day of hope. See, after he rode into Jerusalem, Jesus and his followers gathered to celebrate a Passover meal. And the Passover, if you remember, would celebrate the time that when they were in Egypt, it was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. 400 years of slavery. Captives in Egypt. And this Passover night, is the night that God says, that Egypt says, okay, you're free. We give up. And it was the day, the moment that Israel was free then to go. So they celebrate this Passover, and it was a tradition. So they would get together to celebrate the release from captivity to freedom. It's the last formal time Jesus had with his followers, and they ate together, and this is where that Last Supper is where we get the tradition of communion from. And Jesus said, do this, remember this, every time you eat this and drink this, remember what I'm about to do for you. And the disciples, listen, they did not understand at that moment all that was going to happen. They didn't understand fully, right? But as they ate, Jesus encouraged them, listen, don't forget the unconditional love that God has for you. He's basically saying, don't forget all the nonsense I'm about to do for you. Please don't forget this. And at that time, those disciples did not know that that meant the cross was imminent. The cross was the holiest of nonsense. That picture, the Savior of the world, the one who has given us everything good, the one who loves us most, the source of light for everyone, crucified on a cross, despised, rejected, treated with contempt, abused, and battered. That right there is the utmost picture of holy nonsense. That God would subject himself to such pain. And we receive communion in our services every month. We do it monthly. We could do it every week, but practically we just do it monthly. There's no rule. We could do it every day. We could do it all day long. Doesn't matter. The point is this. We do it to remember how much he loves us. That he's the hope of the world. We could fill this room 1,000 times over with people yet to hear this message, yet to understand, still believe in nonsense about God because they've never actually heard the truth. Because there's a world that wants to keep them suppressed. The bread represents his body, sacrificed for us. It's a demonstration of his love. And the cup represents his blood, his grace and forgiveness. But before we share communion together, well, I would like to sing a song. And I'm going to ask Vic to lead a song in a moment. It's a song we've sung before, but it talks about our need for Jesus. And what we're told is that when we come to communion, we're supposed to come thoughtfully. It's not just a tradition. We do it, yeah, all right, and move on. Like, yeah, we did it again. Oh, those crackers taste terrible. Man, I'm really thirsty now. I wish I could have a lot more grape juice. Right? Like it's so easy to get in. If you've grown up in church, it's so easy to just become just routine. But we're told to come to this moment thoughtfully. And the lyrics of this song say, when our homes are hit by heartbreak, let your presence meet us there. And when the pain seems overwhelming, we hold on to you. When the streets are torn by chaos, we will be your hands and feet. And when the darkness brings division, may we be your light. Because we know our world needs Jesus. And we know our world needs freedom. So give us eyes to see the hurting and the broken. And let our lives align with every word you say. See, as we come to this moment, perhaps you need Jesus today. Jesus, I need you anew today. I'm hurting. I'm broken. I'm lost. I'm confused. And God, I'm even a little angry. And perhaps I've directed at you. And God, I need to confess. I know I need you, but I believe some nonsense about you. God, I need you right now. As we sing, let this song be your declaration, that your confession. And as we're singing, if you've got someone on your heart, if there's a specific person, a group of people, you go, God, they need to know this. Let it be your prayer, your intercession on their behalf. We're going to share communion in just a moment, but we're going to sing first. It's a way of making sure, God, we want to not miss this moment. So I encourage you, right where you are, would you just sing along? You don't have to have a good voice, but let it just come from your heart. Sing from a place of sincerity. So, Vic, would you lead us in this?